Hello and thank you for listening to the Travis Talks Education Podcast. Today in episode 3 is academic transparency in the athlete recruiting process. Today's episode is brought to you by AdvisEdu. AdvisEdu is a think tank company focusing on how innovation in higher education impacts NCAA academic policy and how membership institutions can fairly be monitored and assessed academically to ensure all student athletes are getting a quality educational experience. AdvisEdu looks to stay ahead of the game by participating in the overall innovation discussion and representing the voice and opinion of the NCAA membership institutions in many different channels of communication. AdvisEdu produces white papers on various topics that impact intercollegiate athletics today and tomorrow. So for today's episode, I want to spend some time on the academic transparency in the athlete recruiting process and the problems associated with that I see from speaking to others and my own experience as well, and really talk about what prospective student athletes and families should be focused on as they are in the recruiting process from an academic perspective, and then what information is being sent to these students either beforehand or as they're on campus, what is being told to the prospective student athlete and their families by the coaches, and then what the institution and the athletic departments can do to make sure that students at the end of the road of their eligibility don't come back and say, I was told I could do this when I came in and I didn't, and I have regrets about what I majored in at your institution. We want to fulfill the promise of a college degree, but what I don't think a lot of people realize is getting into college is one thing, okay? Now, college to me is important. I wouldn't be doing this podcast. I wouldn't be working in higher education. But what I see a lot is students focus so much on getting into school, and then they just don't put as much effort into what am I going to major in and what school am I going to attend. We get accepted to college. Okay, then what? So a couple of things that this will lead to is talking about majors and then using that as a factor involved in the overall search of a school. And sometimes, you're recruited, and obviously athletics, depending on maybe your sport or the coach relationship, that you're going to love the institution apart from the academics. But for the most part, everyone should be throwing the academic piece into the recruiting process. And I do think that coaches and schools do a great job of selling the academic component on a recruiting visit, but I'm not so sure that we have a good way in higher education overall, not just in athletics, but to verify the information that is being sent on these official visits. So one of the biggest things I have with that, the issues, is that everything is a ranking. So if you're on a recruiting visit, you're going to hear probably a lot about our program is ranked this, our academic program is ranked this. But where's the validation? Because in my opinion, college rankings are a horrible sense of an institution. Typically, it has nothing to do with the actual academic components on campus. The other part I'm going to get into is who is telling this information and what role do they have on the institution. So is it a coach telling you? Is it a faculty member? Is it an academic advisor or admissions? Someone involved in the academic component needs to be telling this information to prospective student athletes and their families. So throughout the episode, going to talk on a bunch of different things, but it all comes down to what can students that are being actively recruited right now or next year or 2 years from now or 3 years from now, what should them and their families be thinking about on the recruiting process other than getting their film, their highlight reel pinned to the top of their Twitter profile or creating their recruiting account? I want you to focus on academics. So by listening today, whether you're a prospective student athlete or you know someone that is, share this episode with them. If you work in the industry, I'd love to get your opinion on that on today's episode. You can always follow me on Twitter at Travis Higher Ed or connect with me on LinkedIn, and we'll have that conversation. I'd love to hear more about what's going on at your schools on the recruiting visits. And for more information on everything, just always go to www.advisedu.com. That's AdvisEdu.com. So one of the biggest things on the agenda item today when we're talking about the recruiting process is the practical availability of certain majors from the schools that you're considering. Now, either directly or indirectly, coaches seem to not mention that certain majors are going to be off limits due to a basic time conflict with their sport and will be basically off limits. Josh Rosen, the UCLA quarterback, actually did bring this up about, as an economics major, there's certain classes that are during practice time. And as the quarterback on the football team, a team sport, you really have a very difficult time taking certain classes to get in the way of your degree, that get in the way of your degree whenever you're also there to play a sport. Now, that is obviously a high-profile institution, a high-profile sport, and one of the top draft picks in the recent NFL draft saying that. So it held a lot of weight, was on ESPN, things like that. But what we don't see is this happens everywhere. You're going to have team sports, and you're going to have majors that have time conflicts. So if I can't have an early morning because of workouts or I have an afternoon practice, you are going to have some potential issues. And I think that from speaking to other academic advisors and knowing some of them, the coaches throughout these levels, I'm not sure that they want to be as honest as possible about the fact that some of these majors are not going to work out. And if you're coming in, you want to be an engineering major, I hope that you find a way to be an engineering major, because what you don't want to do is settle and say, oh, I wanted to be an engineer, but I can't because I'm going to be a football player, I'm going to be a baseball player, and we're going to miss a lot of my classes in the spring, so it's just not going to work out. Instead, I'll do something like psychology or business, and I'll just focus on engineering later. I think already a big issue is we just stop dreaming about careers of doing what we want to do and going after it full force because of these 4 years that you're going to play a sport. You got to think big picture. If you want to be an engineer, you need to find a way to be an engineer major while you're at a school. And so that's where I talk about the athletic piece is obviously the most important to a lot of these student athletes, prospective student athletes and their families, but you need to think big picture and ask the right questions. Show me proof of who's in what major. And ask, the engineering faculty. I want to see the engineering faculty today. I want to ask them, when are your classes offered? You can ask a lot of people on campus that. It's a very easy thing to find out what majors are off limits. And that is an issue that I think more students need to be having the conversation on these recruiting visits because they have the leverage. Yes, you can be replaced by being recruited by someone else, but you don't want to get roped into an institution and then leave unhappy. Another issue with the major selection is you can kind of tell who has and has not done their homework on the majors and the programs. So if you're coming into a college visit and as a prospective student athlete or family of a prospective student athlete, you're talking about, I want to be a nursing major. Or once again, I want to be an engineering major, a math major, computer science, what have you. These majors that have very competitive admissions requirements just to be in the major. So you get into the school, that's great, but then you have to apply for the major. If they don't have the high school grades and you don't see the classes being offered at the right time, then you need to be completely honest about how competitive it is to get in there. I've heard too many times from other advising colleagues working at my own institutions in the past is, yeah, we have this program. Yeah, we have a great nursing program. You can definitely do that. And then go to find out, look at their high school information. Their grades suggest that I don't know that they can get into this competitive program. So you need to have realistic admission to certain majors. That conversation needs to be had on the front end so that the student can make the best decision. You don't want to just hope they don't find this information out on their own. I think as coaches and athletic departments and institutions, we need to make sure whatever they're considering, give me a top 5 of your favorite majors, of what you're thinking. Tell me if any of them are very competitive, something that maybe my high school academics aren't good enough to get into right now, or, that's going to be a hard one to do while you're an athlete based on the times the classes are offered. This is information that is a quick glance, but I'm not convinced that everyone shares this information because they might not want to know the answers. If you're a prospective student athlete, and if you're a coach, you might not want to risk losing the recruit just based on their academic major decision. And then one more issue with the availability of majors. the eligibility piece, it does come into a factor. So the eligibility machine, as critics will call it, it gives you a lot of time to figure things out. You get a couple years before you really need to start meeting these percentages. So we talked in a previous episode about the 40, 60, 80%. It's on a 5-year scale, and most majors have it built in where you have electives. So if a student really wants to try a major, maybe it's a challenging major, you need to let them try it if that's their main focus on why they came to your institution or what major they chose at your institution. Respect that enough to give them, a year and a half to try that. And then if they're not performing well enough to get into that major or stay in that major and be successful, then then you need to have the conversation, well, what's a backup? And you show them options. But I'm afraid that, just once again, from previous conversations, previous experiences at the Division I level is, oh, they want to be this major, but no, they can't do that. So they're going to have to be in this. They're not. Well, let's let them try it, okay? So let's see if they can perform, they can hang in there, and they can actually balance that Division I student aspect with their athlete aspect. And then if they can't, okay, let's talk to them about, okay, you're going to have to come up with some other options. This isn't working out, or you just cannot be a student athlete, or you're really going to have to put in a lot of work over the summer school. But I really think we need to respect 3 things. We need to tell them what majors are going to conflict. We need to talk about the realistic chances of them getting into a major based on their high school grades and the competitiveness of the program itself. And then we need to talk about the eligibility piece, but not so early in advance that we just put majors off limits. You need to at least let them have some training ground to try things out. And then if it doesn't work, then let's have that conversation. But let's respect our students enough to know that they've probably done at least a little bit of research and let them try things. And my big issue is no one's validating the information that's being said to recruits about the quality of education or academic data of their athletes and their institutional quality of these certain programs. So I wanted to pull up some numbers from an NCAA goals study. So every once in a while, the NCAA will send out this survey to thousands of student athletes across all divisions. But I'm going to focus on a few questions of Division I that really struck my interest based on today's podcast. And it starts with, my coach cares about whether I earn my degree. Now, the percent of responding is agree or strongly agree. In Division I men's, it's 81%. Division I women, that's 76%. So that is the percent who say, yes, I agree or strongly agree that my coach cares about whether I earn my degree. And this was the 2015 NCAA goals study. So this is pretty recent. This is the most recent one that's been published. And you see 81% and 76%. You think that's great. What's concerning to me is that means about 20 and 25% of each of those think that their coach doesn't care. That is the telling issue. 81 sounds high, 76 is high. But you know what? I just think that number, if it's not 90 or above, I have a problem with that. A coach, I've seen how much coaches care about these students from a person perspective, and then as a student athlete, obviously. But whenever we're talking about the academic components, so earning the degree, if they don't feel that you're 100% behind them, that leads me to think that maybe we kept them from trying certain things and that they might be feeling like they got a little bit of a raw deal. So part of the goals study was talking about, has your athletic participation prevented you from majoring in what you really want? So I have some numbers in front of me for baseball, men's basketball, and then both levels of football, FBS and FCS. And the numbers are higher than the other sports, and some have regrets and some do not have regrets. But it's very clear that in these 3 sports and these 4 different levels, athletic participation has gotten in the way of what they majored in. And so looking at our current student athletes with these results kind of can be, if the prospective student athletes can see these, then they're going to look and be like, maybe I should focus a little bit more on my academic major and know ahead of time what I'm getting myself into, what's off limits and what's on limits. And so with the off limits, baseball said 32% of the respondents said that their athletic participation did prevent them from majoring in what they actually wanted. Now, 8% of those had regrets. 24% did not have regrets, but they understood it as kind of give and take part of being a Division I student athlete. Men's basketball. So 29% said that they actually do believe their participation prevented them from majoring in something they wanted. 7% had regrets about that. FBS football, so Football Bowl Series, 36% said yes, and 11% said they did have regrets in that decision. FCS football, so Football Championship Series, 28% respondents said yes, that their athletic participation prevented them from majoring in something they wanted, and 7 of which had regrets. Now you're looking at baseball at 8%, and then men's basketball and FCS football at 7%, saying that they do have regrets. What that's telling me is they feel like they got a wrong deal. But the overwhelming majority of these numbers, so 24%, 22, 25, 21, said yes, but I do not have regrets. And what that tells me is that they just accept that as, part of being the trade-offs of being a student athlete at the Division I level. And what I'm trying to get through to prospective student athletes and families is it doesn't have to be like that. If you're being recruited by multiple institutions and your major means that much to you, then you know what you want to do, then use that as leverage in the recruiting process. Don't be afraid to tell them, I want to come in here and I want to major in this. If you don't know, that's fine. But if you do, stick to your guns, find an institution where you can make it fit. And then I'm going to talk about towards the end of this of how to kind of reassure yourself that you're going to have that opportunity while you're there. And this one was quite interesting as well. If you weren't a college athlete, would you still choose your current major? The respondents here say would or probably would. So if you weren't a college athlete, would you still have chosen your major? The numbers line up similar to the last question, but baseball said 76% would or probably would stick with the same major. Men's basketball, it's only 70%. FBS football, also 70%, and FCS football, 77%. So when you talk about that, you're looking at about 25% short, 30% short of 100% rate. That kind of coexists with the last question of, do they feel like they were prevented from doing a major? And so that's two different questions of this whole total group of the NCAA goal study. So that does kind of reinforce the message that it's give and take. So being a student athlete is all about balance, but in certain majors, it's going to be a problem if you don't figure that out on the front end. Then there's nothing really you can do about it once you hit those NCAA continuing eligibility requirements after your second year. So try and figure out the major situation as early as possible so you can make other plans if you don't want to regret it. And kind of just breaking down the majors, going into the classes. So has athletic participation prevented you from taking classes that you wanted to take? So I mentioned the Josh Rosen talking about it. It's hard to get some of those economic classes around football schedule. So the survey, looking at FBS football, just to stay with that theme, this is the respondents saying yes, and they either do not have regrets or they do have regrets. So talking about off-limit classes, yes, but I do not have regrets, 32%. And then 18% of FBS football players said that they do have regrets about having those classes off limits. So that goes with the major. This didn't specify, was it classes that you were taking for your major or electives that you enjoyed or your gen ed core credits that you were looking to take. So I'm thinking mostly here it's probably the major classes. So FBS football, though, an alarming 50% saying that their athletic participation has limited them from taking classes they wanted to take. Men's basketball, 34%, 11 of which said, yes, I have regrets about it as well. Baseball, also high at 41%, only 10% having regrets. And then FCS football championship series, 42%. So you're looking at those numbers of who says that athletic participation has kept them from taking classes. Is 41%, a 34%, 50%, a 42%. And those numbers are staggering, but they're not unexpected, right? So if you work in the industry, and even if you don't, you can probably imagine that these demanding sports participation at the D1 level, especially, you're going to have some trade-off. But what we have to do is find other ways to incorporate the balance to also allow our prospective student athletes And then once they're on campus, we need to let them major and take the classes they want. So even if that's hard to do, how can we set that up so that students can make sure that they're leaving with an education that they actually feel good about? Not just that they graduated with a degree, but is it the degree that they want to use as whether they're getting into grad school or they're going into a certain field? They hit the ground running where they at least have the right degree for what they want to get into. Another concept that I want to talk about is called undermatching. And what I mean by that is we often read and hear about athletes getting into schools that they probably shouldn't have been admitted to in the first place because they were underneath the requirements of the regular student body. But what about the ones that are at a disadvantage by not attending the best school they could have gotten into? Are athletes attending less challenging schools only to pursue their sport? If so, why and what's the potential long-term impact? So I hope that prospective student athletes think about this. If you're on the fence about one school or another, so school A, school B, this is where the academic piece I talked about needs to be a factor. It doesn't need to be the only factor, but it's the same thing as athletics shouldn't be the only factor. If you're being recruited and the offers, are very similar, maybe a full ride versus, you're only going to get a very small equivalency scholarship, then yeah, that might be a little bit more of a factor to consider. But undermatching is a very real thing. Think about it. If you are a top-notch student in high school, yet you're going to an institution that, no disrespect, is not as up to par with your ability, or at least not seen as up par based on what you want to do for a living, then you could be putting yourself at a disadvantage by going to that school. Even if you graduate with honors, if you're going to a school that in a very competitive marketplace where the alumni are from more prestigious schools or graduate schools look down on that particular undergrad degree versus another one, and I've seen it happen, then you could set yourself up for a lifelong, not to scare you, and I don't think anything's lifelong necessarily, regret for this, but it would be a potential downfall that you could be at the end of your eligibility, the end of your sport, and you could have serious regrets about going to that institution. And so what I think more students need to do is focus on what schools are your options, and then how big of a factor should academics go into that. Another reason why undermatching is a big concern, in my opinion, is that it's more prevalent in equivalency sports. So your athletic scholarship is even more limited, and potentially you're going to pay more out of pocket, especially if you're an out-of-state student being recruited. A lot of coaches do recruit out of state, and not uncommon anymore at all. And so if you're in an equivalency sport and all of a sudden you're only getting a partial scholarship, you are looking at that offset money from this college scholarship from the out-of-state tuition really might not be saving you any money. So why not, go to the school that you can get into if it's going to be roughly the same amount of money for sure, and then walk onto that team. You could probably reach out to that coach, get recruited. If you're not going to require or demand a scholarship, then you could probably still be on the team. So if you're still a Division I athlete, then I don't think you have to make it 100% about the athletic component. If you are worried about what's this school going to look like whenever I leave here with my name on that paper and that institution name on my diploma, when I'm trying to get my nursing degree, is trying to get me a job in a competitive space in my hometown, but everyone else has, the more popular institution in town that produces more nursing majors, you need to look at what are the ramifications of choosing a certain school. Are you undermatching? Jeff Salingo even mentioned in an article called "When It Does Matter Where You Go to College" from the Washington Post back in March 2015, he said that too often the reason students make these questionable choices is a combination of inertia, lack of information, lack of forward planning for college, and lack of encouragement. He goes on to talk about sometimes students rebuff the best college because they're getting a free ride somewhere else, which might be the scholarship. But I talked about, if you're an equivalency sport, there's a big myth that everyone's on a full ride. you need to take into consideration how big is my athletic scholarship and how important is it to me to have to go here if the even if the academic is a little bit of a a fall off from where I could get into. How big of an issue is that, especially if you're out of state paying out of state tuition? Those are things to consider. And unfortunately, Jeff is correct that there's just a lot of unpopular choices based on a lack of planning for college. Everyone wants the scholarship, so they might not even consider the fact that I could go to a better school for academics, walk on the team, and kind of go from there. I understand that's not a popular choice among many people, but I think we need to get into the realities of, let's bring back the balance. Realize I'm not going to go pro. It's not going to be the end of the world if I go to a team that's a little less successful now. 2 years from now, that choice could turn all the way over. Maybe your team's not performing that well anymore. And the bottom line is, you should be checking the graduation rates of a college you're considering. Take particular notes of the graduation rates for students like you. For example, they differ between men and women and even by majors. So you can look these things up. If the real value of college in your actual graduation, then there's research showing that it really does matter where you go to school. Now, if you're going to a business degree, maybe it's more of a generic degree that it's not going to tip the scale too much. But if you're going to be a nurse or you're going to be an occupational therapist, then trying to get employed, they're going to be taking into consideration the school that you went to. So now I want to send kind of my solution out there, and I'm calling it the Transparent Academic Report Card. And what I mean by that is there's information that is being told to student athletes that are still in high school, or you're a transfer student, and there's no validation, no verification of the information that's being told to you. And what I'd like to see is we have this official visit paperwork, these rules that we have to abide by, signatures involved, yet there's nothing guaranteeing the information that was said. And as I just talked about, where you go to college can actually matter. And then we talked about in the goals study is there were student athletes that came in with regrets. So what that means is, they came in and they felt like they got either a raw deal or maybe they were steered in a certain direction, but they came in there and they had a goal in mind of a certain major, but then that athletic participation couldn't be part of it. And when you're being recruited by multiple schools, like most student athletes are, you want to have options. And then if deals and offers are starting to kind of look similar, you need to have a way to have the academic information verified so that you can make the best academic and athletic decision. So with this transparent academic report card, I envision official visits entailing an informative and clear academic report, either presented by the faculty athletic rep or an academic appointee that is not in athletics, so that you could actually be required to go over it with the student, and then the prospective student athlete, the PSA to be correct in the language of the official visit, they would actually be required to review it and sign it, and then that would be kept on file with their official record documentation. This would hold both sides accountable for the quality of and access, at least to a certain degree, to a certain education. So they have the expectation that I'm going to be able to measure in this. And then also they have the opportunity to see and stack up institutions, athletic departments, academic nature. This would hold both sides accountable for quality of and access to certain education, to at least have the expectation that I'm coming here and I'm going to be able to major in what I want to do. And then also something to hold themselves next to other offers that come in and be judged on athletic department's academics data. I think that if we're going to say we care about academics, just because higher education doesn't do a good job of showing, student A two different schools and compare them and contrast them, if you're going to have a targeted population that you're recruiting heavily like a student athlete, then you should know that there should be a comparison involved between school A, B, C, D. however many schools they're being recruited by. Just think how much better it would be if there was verified academic information so that the parents and the prospective student athlete can not only look at costs and what the scholarship value is, but look at the academic performance of those on my potential team. So if I'm football or I'm baseball or I'm soccer, I'm able to look at school A, B, C, and D and see the outcomes. So the graduation success rate, the APR, the retention, everything that you can have information on. And there is a lot of this information, but it's not visually accessible for these prospective student athletes. So what would be in the report? Now, my idea, I'm doing a white paper on this right now, is have a major breakdown of the team roster of that school year, the most recent report you can have, to show a clear trend in what majors. If you say you want to do engineering and you go through that list and you see, oh, there's 5 guys on the engineering major on the team, that's a pretty good tell that you're able to accomplish that major. If you go through that list and you see no one's an engineer major, then you'll be kind of prompted to ask that question. Is this major just not something that anyone's interested in on the team, or is it off limits based on class schedules? And the most recent grad rate of the team. So, this is all searchable in a database, but if you had on there, what's your graduation success rate? That's the NCAA measure. And then what's the federal graduation rate of your team? Then that's FGR, that's on there as well. And then most recent APR score, most recent cumulative team GPA. Don't get me started on GPA. I actually think that it's gamed more than eligibility and progress towards degree. As an Ask Any Academic Advisor, the most popular day in your office is probably the deadline to drop or withdraw from a class. So I think GPAs are skewed, but it is an accepted method of comparison tool in higher education. So let's have that on there. And then finally, if you don't work at an NCAA institution, then you might not know what this is, but it's called the Institutional Performance Program, IPP for short. There's an academic data with comparison of sports, either institutions or sports, and you can actually compare the same information on visual charts to other conference foes, other Division I institutions based on that sport, and that is a good comparison tool. But here's the problem. You have to have access to see it. And the only people that have access to see it are the people that work at those institutions in certain positions. Now, this information would be very helpful for a prospective student athlete if they're looking at, they're in the Missouri Valley and they're looking at all these schools in the Midwest and, the offers are very similar. Then they might like a chart that shows comparing, Missouri Valley School A through, all 10 of them and see what the best school choice is for outcomes. So, what's the best graduation success rate? What's the best APR score? That information would be very helpful. They have GPA. They have total credit hours earned each year. And you can actually see that information. Then that would be very helpful to a recruit. The problem, though, is accessibility to this information. Now, a lot of the information is out there to the public, but we're not telling them where to go find it, and we don't expect parents to necessarily go and use that as a comparison tool. So this report would include all that information, and then every official visit you could go on, you would actually be able to see this report, take it with you, you'd sign it, so knowing that it was gone over with you or you looked at it, and then you have yourself a very real comparison tool between schools A, B, C, D, E in the recruiting process. Now, I would require that for the official visits, but I would also encourage it to be shown on unofficial visits. So I think that should be a department policy decision, but this academic report, in my opinion, could go a long way for the transparency to recruits. Another reason why there might be some pushback on this, I understand, but the NCAA requires schools with major NCAA violations to actually post that on their athletic website. So you'll link it up to the case that the NCAA posts. So why not require certain NCAA reported academic information that we already have? So we already have access to this, but we know that, yet we're still not pushing it as a recruiting tool. There's no way to verify it if it's just word of mouth. This would be a way to actually have it on paper and have it verified, and then put that on the athletic website for transparency. I would love if higher education in general would do this, but good luck getting all the schools to comply with that. But we have this measurement. The NCAA has most of the things on the report already that I recommend. Now, you could require schools to have that on their athletic website. Every NCAA school has a very good interactive athletic website. Have an academic page on there, a notification on your compliance page, whatever you want, but have this report up there. The NCAA already has it, searchable databases, so you can link it to that if anything, but have the report on there, and you have nothing to worry about your transparency, and have them sign it. And then you can't have 2 years later, 4 years later, the student leave and say, I wasn't given a good education. You actually have some hard evidence of showing what your team and your athletic department policy has been in the past, and kind of to help protect you, showing that you're fulfilling that mission. And then look at it as a recruiting edge, because if you have strong academics, then that is only going to push you further along the line if you have that athletic success. And those that might struggle a little bit in athletic success, you might be able to point towards evidence saying, we graduate our student athletes, they get jobs and they leave here. Our team and our program is healthy academically. You'll actually have that as a backdrop to your recruiting edge. And the ones that don't actually have the strong academics, those are going to be pain points, and they're going to have some homework to do, and they're going to have the motivation to improve things. So we have the APR improvement plan. If your APR score takes you out of postseason ability, but if you're on the borderline of your academics and you're losing out to other people in your division, then you're going to have to invest more money in that academic support. You're going to need to look about, who are we recruiting? Are they fitting the institution? Look at your APR retention scores, see who's leaving, why are they leaving? All those things all tie back into if we just had a transparent academic report card. So I'll recap just by, talking about what conversation we just had, but just lead the way in higher education transparency. So in my opinion, colleges do a poor job at posting their academic profiles out of fear of looking bad against competition. Now, NCAA schools, they should embrace the transparency and earn respect to their students and the students' families by being honest about the academic information that we have up there. All this information is available. Let's just turn the on button, put the link to the PDF, whatever you want, on the athletic website, and be done with it. Then be honest about what majors are on and off the table. So we talked about the NCAA goals study and how it would be a lot better to hear what alumni say or past student athletes, and kind of ask them, a longitudinal study of, are those numbers go up as far as who had regrets once they leave the institution, and if they have a hard time getting a job. That information is being done in higher education. So if we could start looking at that, but just be honest about what majors are on and off the table, as well as classes, and then only target recruits that fit your institutional admission type. That is the quickest way to derail your APR and lose out on very big earnings from the academic revenue distribution that we talked about in a previous episode. If you're bringing in students that cannot compete academically, you need to really take a hard look at what you're doing, at least in supporting them, but only target recruits that fit the institutional admission type. And then tie an academic transparency report card to the official visit paperwork. Have it signed, verification of what academic information is being sold to these students on these recruiting trips, and have a comparison tool for the families to compare offers A, B, C, D, and E. And then that academic piece can kind of be repositioned as an outlier in that decision of where you're going to go to college. So that wraps up today's episode on academic transparency in the recruiting process. I'll leave you with just recommendation to check out the website, advisedu.com. That's AdvisEdu.com. Take a look at the topics, the projects I'm working on. You can look at the table of contents of the book, Two Sides, Same Coin, a reminder that higher education and the NCAA are on the same team. And follow me on Twitter at Travis Higher Ed, and let's have some conversations about everything NCAA academics, higher education, innovation, all those things and more. I'll talk to you next time on the Travis Talks Education Podcast. Thanks again for listening.